Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show and today's True Crime Christmas special. Today we are diving deep into the case of Alex Murdaugh, and there are updates in this incredible case, believe it or not. His story begins much earlier than the crimes that made national headlines over the past few years, and no one has covered the story quite like the Wall Street Journal's Valerie Bauerlein, who wrote the book The Devil at His Elbow. We get into everything from Murdaugh's family history to the details of his downfall and the new info. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe to this show on YouTube and follow me on Insta, Facebook, and X. Are you ready to jumpstart your health in 2025? Now's the time, right? Lumen can help you. Did you know that 80% of resolutions fail by February? Womp womp. You can beat the odds, though, with Lumen and improve your health. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you are burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you will know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fat or carbs, and much more. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, and you will know that optimal metabolic health has many benefits. You will see this firsthand, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, and better sleep. Take the next step to improving your health and getting more information about yourself. Go to Lumen, that's spelled lumen.me/Megyn to get 20% off your Lumen. lumen.me/Megyn for 20% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. Valerie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is all so fascinating. And one of the most eye-opening things I read was about Alex Murdaugh's background. He comes from a long line of deeply ethically problematic people, which I did not know. All you ever heard about him was that he came from this very storied family. They were lifelong solicitors or like the prosecutors in their town in South Carolina, very well respected. They controlled everything. It was far more nefarious than that. Can you take us back?
Oh, it absolutely was. I mean, I think one of the biggest surprises I had researching this book was that every crime that Alex was eventually convicted of had some echo in the past. And that includes like violence against women or overtures of violence against women. That includes insurance fraud, like by the side of the road, there was an active insurance fraud that started the family dynasty, stealing from clients, drug trafficking. There were echoes in the past for every single crime we're talking about, even a boat wreck that caused really a traumatic injury. So that surprised me too. It wasn't just Alex. It was the history going back to 1920 of this family.
Yes. I mean, it really does show you, if you have a family, a father, a grandfather who are committing crimes and teaching you either explicitly or implicitly that that's okay, your odds of becoming a criminal are obviously much higher. But hello, women of the world, pay attention. Pay attention to your spouse, the guys you're dating. It can work the other way around too. And what they come from, who they come from. So his great grandfather, Randolph Murdoch Sr., basically committed suicide and insurance fraud at the same time.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I was in Hampton just last week. I actually was standing at the train tracks just south of Alameda, where the home place that Alex went the night of the homicides. His great-grandfather, Randolph Sr., was a very prominent man. I mean, every meal he ate was front page news. Like, where was he now? He was the district attorney for 4 counties in the Low Country of South Carolina. He was very sick. He was 53 years old. He was dying. He was at the end of his life. He had kidney failure at a time when there was no cure, right? There was no dialysis. He was broke. He had been a big investor in a bank, and then the bank failed. And through the Depression, I found documents down at the courthouse in Hampton where he just would say, there's no chance I can ever pay these people back. So he was broke, he was dying, and he knew how to do one thing incredibly well, which was sue the railroad, which at that time in 1940 was one of the only entities worth suing. So what happened was he was driving back from a poker game in Yemassee, a little town right on the Hampton County line, at 1 a.m, hottest day of the summer, 90 some degrees. He stops short of his home and turns onto a deserted train tracks and is at the base of it. And as the train is coming, and if you grew up in a small town near a railroad, you know what time the train comes through. The train is coming north, and you can hear it for miles. It's coming north, it's bearing down on this train tracks. He speeds up onto the tracks themselves, and they're blowing the whistle, they're flashing the light. It's a clear moonlit night. He sees them, and instead of like driving off, he waves at them. And what happens is there's a coroner's jury, and the coroner, of course, was a protege of Randolph Sr. The sheriff was a protege of Randolph Sr. There was an inquest the next morning, and guess what? The local coroner's jury found that in spite of the testimony of the engineer and others, it was an accident. And it cleared the way for Randolph Murdoch Jr., Alec's grandfather, to sue the railroad for the equivalent of millions of dollars, which is what he did successfully.
Is Randolph Murdoch Jr. Buster?
Randolph Murdoch Jr. is Old Buster, and Old Buster was a real force to be reckoned with. He was solicitor from 1940, when he was 25 years old, to 1986. So Roosevelt to Reagan. And he even stayed in that office beyond that time. The legislature finally essentially forced him. They created a rule that essentially forced him to retire, but he kept going into the office as a volunteer solicitor. So Randolph Murdoch Jr., Old Buster, Alex Murdaugh idolized him. He told many people that he wished he'd been born in Old Buster's day, because in those days, what you said was what the truth was. And Old Buster was, he ruled with an iron fist. He was one of those guys that would rather be feared than loved.
And he also continued fraud and potential violence against women.
Old Buster, I was able to pull 900 pages from the National Archives of the records from his trial, his federal trial. The feds charged him with bootlegging, actually running the largest bootlegging ring in the South. He was the ringleader. They charged 24 people. Old Buster, Alec's grandfather, was charged with leading this entire ring in Colleton County, and he was accused of taking a cash bribe in the hallway of the Colleton County Courthouse, which is the hallway that we went in and out every day of Alex Murdaugh trial. He was accused of intimidating witnesses, buying off witnesses, and eventually of tampering with the jury by buying off the foreman. And he was one of the only people in that entire weeks-long federal trial that was acquitted. So there's a history of Alex Murdaugh was convicted of drug trafficking. His grandfather was credibly accused and narrowly escaped being convicted of bootlegging. Wow. So again, there's echoes in the past. Tell
us about the mistress who got on the wrong side of Alex Murdaugh's grandfather.
So there was testimony in Alec's trial, as you remember. There was testimony that Alec was somewhat of a philanderer, and that certainly is a history in the family going back generations. His grandfather, Old Buster, had a mistress, several, but one in particular who he was in touch with for many, many years, and her name was Ruth Fox. And Ruth Fox was married to a local, like a northern baron who came down and bought a plantation, and she was from one of the nation's first families, a really impressive woman in her own right. And she had been in the Navy during World War II, like training pilots, which is kind of wild to think about what kind of woman was doing that in the 40s. And she met Buster and asked for his help in getting out of her obligations. He's like, I know everybody. I'll know all U.S. senators. I'll help you get out of this bind. They got to know each other. And what you know, a year later, she is pregnant with his child. It's just such an incredible story. She goes to the house, and we're talking about the same house that Alec went to the night of the homicides at Moselle. She goes to the house, knocks on the door, speaks to Alec's grandmother and says, you have a son, I have a son, these boys shouldn't eat. And the grandmother says, don't let my name come out of your mouth ever again, go away. And it was a stunning thing, because she had survived essentially when she had told old Buster that she was pregnant. He had tried to have her killed. He had a fixer. The story goes he had a fixer of one of many who laid in wait underneath her porch one night and got a little bit too drunk and fell asleep and didn't kill her. So there was just like this incredible echoes throughout this story. Isn't it amazing?
Yes, it is amazing. I mean, I cannot, you must have been just slack-jawed when you read up about the direct line from which he came. And it makes sense of everything. So it didn't stop there. It didn't even skip a generation. Alex's father also had a history of paying people off to cover up a boat accident, which of course would set off Alex's own story with a different boat accident as well.
Well, there was and there was certainly a terrible boat accident in 1998 from the same island, like Murdoch Island, where you'll remember the tragic boat wreck that killed Mallory Beach in 2019. They took the Murdoch family boat from the family compound, which is called Murdoch Island. Back in 1998, Alex's younger brother was having a party on Murdoch Island. There was a boat there, and it's incredible. I couldn't believe it when I saw the documents. It had been seized in a drug raid by the solicitor's office, so by Old Buster, and he liked the boat. So he kept it for his own use at the island, and the family used it. So it's late at night. There's some guests there that wanted to take the boat home rather than the roads because they didn't want to get in trouble. They've been drinking for many hours. And these young men set off on a boat ride home, and it's tricky. We know from what happened with the wreck that killed Mallory Beach. It's very shallow waters in places. They hit a shoal and stopped, and then immediately started back up, and didn't realize that one of the guests had fallen overboard and had gotten run over by the motor and sustained a traumatic brain injury. And I've got hundreds of pages of documents from the state that show. The Murdochs were involved in trying to make that wreck go away. Even some of the same DNR, the natural resources officers, even some of the same officers who were involved in the Mallory Beach wreck they were working that night as well. So the echoes in the past are sometimes I couldn't believe it. I really was gobsmacked many times in a row.
Yes, same. I'm having the same reaction just sitting here. So then, of course, we get to Alec, and this whole thing that we watched, this double murder trial in which he was found guilty of killing his wife and his own son, was set off by that boating accident, the second one, not the one you discussed where the woman was run over, but more recently with the younger generation, while Alec was out on a boat, was drinking, and they had an accident, and Mallory Beach was thrown from the boat and wasn't found for some time later, and she was dead. And that old Murdoch instinct to cover it up, run cover for those involved, or especially for Alec, kicked in and would set off a chain of events that would ultimately destroy the Murdoch family.
And it's so poignant to look at pictures of Mallory. She was 19 years old when she died. She was just full of life. I've gotten to know her family over the course of reporting this story. And it was Alec's boat, but it was his son, Paul Murdoch, who was 19 at the time, who was driving. I mean, I think the facts established that he was driving. He was criminally charged with it. And so he is incredibly drunk. He drank a lot. I talked with people that knew the family. He had been sneaking beer since he was 8 years old, and at a certain point, not even sneaking them. So he was very, very drunk. He had 19 drinks that night. His BAC when he got to the hospital was 0.286. But he was a person, even at 19, who'd been drinking for numbers of years and had been driving drunk for numbers of years, according to people I talked to who were involved in wrecks with him before. But so he gets angry at his girlfriend, who's one of the passengers on the boat, confronts her. She says, "You're too drunk to drive. Give everybody the keys." Slaps her, spits in her face, goes back to the wheel of the boat and floors it. The equivalent of 28 miles an hour. And they're going through a very narrow, very shallow path, and it hit a bridge that fast, and Mallory is thrown overboard and never resurfaces. And what all the evidence, I've got thousands of pages of documents, some of them public, many of them not many of them that had not been reviewed before, that just showed that when Alec got to the hospital that night where these young people had been on the boat he went room to room to room trying to get everyone on the same page. He had his grandfather, Old Buster's badge outside of his pocket, pretending to be a law enforcement officer. And I have his cell phone records and have tracked his path that night. Do you remember when he testified that he put blue lights and siren on the Suburban that he was driving?
Yes.
It was almost physically impossible for him to get from Moselle, where he and Maggie were living at the time, to the hospital unless he was going fabulously fast, 80 or 90 miles an hour. And I think it stands to reason, and I argue this in the book, that he almost certainly used lights to get to the hospital before the other families and get everyone on the same page. But it really was his undoing. The reason that he said he wanted to live in Old Buster's time is that, there was so much evidence in the video cameras in the hospital that night, so many statements, there was so much, everything is recorded, right? And he could not outrun modernity. And in the end, that night and his actions the night of the boat wreck really was the beginning of the end of the family.
For, among other reasons, he was then sued by the Beach family. And
Correct.
that in the course of that lawsuit, he would have to produce discovery speaking to his economic status, his financial data, and so on. And he was, we know separately now, running a massive fraud, stealing from his law firm, had a massive drug problem, or so he testified, and was very worried this was all going to come out. He would be exposed. And at the same time, his law firm, was this coincidental, Valerie, that the law firm started an investigation of Alec at the same time for possible ethical breaches, or were those two things related, the lawsuit and the law firm getting interested in him?
Well, it's all kind of woven together. And what happened in the immediate aftermath of the boat wreck is that Mallory's family was having a tough time finding a lawyer to represent their interest. In Renee Beach, Mallory's mom tells the story of being down at the landing where the boat had come to rest, and wanting to go down there and see where her daughter was, where she was the last time she was spotted. And the police were very, very kind, but said, "I'm sorry, you can't go down there. Here's a case of water for you and your family while you wait." And there was a moment where Randolph Murdoch III, Alec's dad, and Maggie, his wife, came down in their pickup truck, and he waves at the officer and waves him through. And Renee Beach realized then, oh my gosh, this is not a vigil. I thought I was at a vigil mourning my daughter. This is a crime scene. And the family that's been the law in this area for 100 years is in charge of it. I need a lawyer. And she made a critical decision, which is to hire a lawyer to represent the family's interest. And that lawyer was a key player and a big character in this book. And his name is Mark Tinsley. And there's no enemy like your former friend. He was very close to Alec. He knew the playbook. He had a card key to get in and out of the Murdoch law firm at will. And he recognized those relationships. He's like, oh, I know he knows these particular officers because of my own personal information. And once he decided to take the Beach's case, he was relentless in showing that that Alec and potentially the officers who were involved in protecting the scene were really protecting Paul from charges. And so he filed a lawsuit in very short order. And that lawsuit sought, like you said, all of Alec's financial records. It's just a standard part of a civil lawsuit to say, how much insurance do you have? What resources could you potentially pay if there was a judgment? And Alec knew more than anyone else that he had been robbing his personal injury clients, the poorest of the poor, for more than a decade. And he knew what any serious inquiry would do. And so he had to stave that off. And in the end, it was his undoing.
So he killed his own wife and his son, Paul, who had been at the helm for that boating accident. And it was an attempt to garner sympathy, like to make him a sympathetic character so that his law firm would move away, would stop investigating him, so that the lawsuit involving Paul would be less strong because, the main culprit would be gone, and who would put this poor man now through the torture of seeing a civil lawsuit through. It was an effort to just change his own financial and reputational fortunes.
No, I think the prosecution argued that very effectively. And one of the things that I think that Mark Tinsley said on the stand is, you know, personal injury lawyers don't think like other people. Their gift, their understanding of a successful one is understanding emotion, like what might motivate a jury to to pay blood money, and a lot of it in a case. They understand what makes people tick. And he knew that, the day of the homicides, June 7th of 2021, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, he had been confronted over some of that missing money that he had been stealing, $792,000, not a small amount. He knew that the law firm was on to him, and he knew also that his father was dying, the patriarch of this family, who had also loaned him $1 million over time, and who he had just been texting with his buddy at the bank. Oh, I'm going to get another loan from my dad for some money he was short. He knew his dad was dying. He knew this lawsuit was pending about his financials. He had been confronted over the missing money, and he also knew that Paul was a mess. I mean, sadly, and may he rest in peace, Paul's drunken actions did not cease with the boat wreck. There's testimony and that even just 10 days before he was killed, he was on a boat drinking, taking some people out, and he had to call his father to get out of it. So Paul's behavior was not de-escalating. If anything, his behavior is getting worse. So yes, I think that the state made a really effective argument that he needed to do something to become, instead of the object of suspicion, an object of sympathy. And what more would do that except becoming instead of somebody, a potential thief, a grieving father, a grieving husband, someone who was the victim of a horrible crime. And for months, he was right. It completely changed the subject.
And he had, prior to getting arrested, done what I guess it was his great-grandfather did, which was attempt to create a suicide situation that would lead to an insurance payout. I mean, now it's like kind of all connecting.
It's all connecting, and it really is extraordinary. So over the course of the summer of 2021, he did almost get away with the murder of Maggie and Paul. He really did. And he almost got away with the thefts that he's now admitted to, dozens and dozens of people, millions and millions of dollars, by, borrowing more money, borrowing money from his best friend, Chris Wilson, borrowing money from the bank, getting fronted money and trying to repay the $792,000 back to the law firm, which he did. And they kind of let it go until, and that goes in July and in August, until the Thursday before Labor Day weekend. His paralegal is in his office looking for some paperwork, which she knows he doesn't like, but she really needed it. She lifts up this folder, finds the check that was missing that proved that he had been stealing. So what happens then is the gig is up. Alex, confronted by his brother, his law partner, and many other law partners, and they say, "You've been stealing. We've got evidence you've been stealing from the firm. You have to go." So he gets fired that Friday of Labor Day weekend. And what happens the next morning? Saturday morning, he tries to fake his own death on the side of the road. And what he said was an insurance fraud attempt to get money for his surviving son, Buster. But what really looks like another way to change the subject, just like he had done back June 7th with the homicides of his wife and son. It really is stranger than fiction.
Did you know that homeowners in America, nationwide, they have over $32 trillion in equity? And cyber criminals are targeting it with a growing scam the FBI calls house stealing. House alarms, doorbell cameras, deadbolts will not work against these thieves because they're not after your stuff. They're after your equity. If your title's not being monitored, scammers can transfer the title of your home into their name and then take out loans against it or even sell it behind your back. The best way to protect your equity is with triple lock protection from Home Title Lock. Triple lock protection is 24/7 monitoring, and God forbid, if the worst happens, restoration services at no out-of-pocket cost to you. When was the last time you checked on your title? Likely never. And that's exactly what scammers are counting on. Make sure you're not already a victim. You can get a free title history report and a 30-day free trial of triple lock protection today by going to HomeTitleLock.com and using the promo code Megan, or click on the link in the description. That's HomeTitleLock.com, promo code Megan. HomeTitleLock.com. Grand Canyon University. It's a private Christian university in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona, and they believe that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. GCU believes in equal opportunity and that the American dream starts with purpose. By honoring your career calling, you can impact your family, friends, and your community. Change the world for good by putting others before yourself. Whether your pursuit involves a bachelor's, master's, or a doctoral degree, GCU's online, on-campus, and hybrid learning environments are designed to help you achieve your unique academic, personal, and professional goals. With over 340 academic programs as of this past June, GCU meets you where you are and provides a path to help you fulfill your dreams. The pursuit to serve others is yours. Let it flourish. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu. That's gcu.edu. Do we think he did not intend to die then when that guy who was next to homeless, I mean, that guy seemed, not like a sophisticated character, when he got him to, quote, shoot him, but it just grazed his head. Yeah. That was always so confusing to me. And I'm like, was this some sort of a sharpshooter? How did the guy manage to actually barely connect with him to the point where it looked like he actually had been shot at, but not so much that he actually killed him?
Yeah. No, there are many theories about what happened actually at the side of the road, but the man you're talking about, Curtis Eddie Smith, will tell you, and he said it. He's like, if I'd shot him, he'd have been dead. So what he believes happened is there was a struggle over the gun. And he has said he thinks that Alec was trying to frame him, that they were struggling over the gun, and maybe Alec was going to, Alec was bigger, Alec is 6'4", 200 pounds. I mean, can he overpower this? And Curtis Eddie Smith is his cousin Eddie is a smaller guy. He's been out on disability for a number of years. Alec was his disability lawyer. And then frame him. And you remember when Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, Alec's lawyers, they said in court filings, they're like, the real killer is Eddie Smith. He was the one who killed Maggie and Paul. And so one of the theories is that Alec may have been trying to kill Eddie and then say, see, he was coming after me to kill me the same way that he killed my wife and son. And it's strange. I don't know if you remember, but Eddie was cashing a lot of checks for Alec over a number of years. And the checks accelerated that summer, that hundreds of thousands of dollars that Alec was effectively paying Eddie in a way. So was he going to say he was blackmailing me? Look at these payments. There are multiple ways to look at what actually happened there. But one of them is that if you look at the photos, and the defense released the photos, they signed a HIPAA release and released all the photos. There are people locally that say, that's not a cut in his head. He fell, and that's the gravel on the side of the road that caused him to be cut. But one thing I should add about Cousin Eddie is that he's actually a cousin. I could not believe it. But if you go back more than 100 years to the Civil War, Alec's great-great-grandfather, so Randolph Sr.'s father, was an officer in the Southern Army, and so was Eddie's great-great-grandfather, and they were brothers.
Wow.
His great-great-grandfather was named Lazarus Murdoch. He was what they call a fire eater, so he was an especially virulent he was anti-union. He made these incredible speeches that got picked up by national media and actually were read by Abraham Lincoln. So Eddie he says he's like, I'm half Murdoch, and he's right. He's part Murdoch. Yeah.
Do we know, Valerie, do we ever figure out, and by the way, just for the audience, I'm talking today to Valerie Bauerlein. She wrote the book, The Devil at His Elbow, Alex Murdaugh and the Fall of a Southern Dynasty. Do we know where all the money went? This is one of the mysteries, right? It just seemed like Alec was taking in so much money via fraud from the law firm, the clients, and so on.
Yeah.
And where did it go? Like, it seemed like he claimed he just spent it on drugs, but the conclusion by many was always, how many drugs could he possibly have taken? He took in more than he could ever have spent, was the layperson conclusion on the funding.
No, and I think one of the key voices in the book is Blanca Simpson, who was the housekeeper at Moselle for many years. And I think the evidence establishes that Alec was using drugs. But I think there's no evidence that he was using the amount of drugs and opioids in particular that he says he was. And I had the benefit of 10 years of spending. I could see through some federal exhibits, I could see what he and Maggie spent over the course of 10 years, down to like when they would go to the Honey Baked Ham store at Thanksgiving. You could see what that expenditure was. And what was so shocking about it, and I think we probably know people like this in our own lives, is as soon as money came in the door, it went out. He was overdrawn tens of thousands of dollars multiple times in a year. Maggie would have to call him and say, can you call the bank? I'm at the grocery store. I need to be able to cash this check. I need to be able to pay for my groceries.
What was he spending it on?
It's extraordinary. It was, they would take a private plane to a USC bowl game instead of flying first class, or, Blanca told me, and there's farm equipment out on Moselle, which is 1,700 acres, a huge, huge property, twice the size of Central Park. And rather than fix, a big piece of heavy equipment, they would just put gallons of oil in it every day. So he was spending hundreds of dollars on oil. It was just, it's hard to even understand where the money was going. But there is missing money, millions of dollars, the feds say, that's still missing. So he spent a lot of it. He spent some of it on drugs. I do subscribe to the idea that he buried some of it at Moselle in PVC pipes. I've talked with people who've been there when those pipes have been dug up, but that you can't, cash is tough. It's tough to bury, millions of dollars in dirt over time. There is a theory, and I think the feds have been pursuing it, that some of the money is offshore. And was he going to run that summer is one of the ideas, but there's the feds say about $6 million that's still missing. So
that makes more sense that we've got millions missing than that he spent it all on the drugs. All right, so then we go to trial. He does wind up arrested. This all comes out. Yeah. There is the moment he is found guilty. Actually, we have that. Let's just watch that. SOT 51.
The State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, in the Court of General Sessions, the July term of 2022, the State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant, indictment for murder, SC Code 16-3-0010, CDR Code 0116, verdict guilty, signed by the forelady.
Okay, and that's interesting for a few reasons. One, he was found guilty. Two, old Becky Hill reading the verdict would come to play a major role in this story, which no one knew at the time. But Becky almost got this verdict thrown out because of her behavior behind the scenes with the jurors. And could her behavior get this verdict thrown out? Is that totally settled? I know that we had a hearing in which a different judge said, no, I'm not throwing out the verdict. But could that be reversed on appeal? I imagine Alex's lawyers are taking that up.
No, it's incredible to watch that footage. I was sitting there that night and I was leaning forward on the edge of my seat just listening to it because I remember that emotion. And all of the docket numbers were like, but what's the answer? So
right, spit it out.
So, but we had been in that courtroom. It's very tight corners. These soaring ceilings. It was designed in the 1820s, but very tight quarters. And we had been in there every day for 6 weeks. And by we, I mean the lawyers, the law enforcement officers, the jury, the Murdochs. They were across the aisle from me. I could, exchange pleasantries every day. And so it was an extraordinary result to be there that night and listen to the verdict read by Becky. And Becky was really like the den mother of the courtroom because the clerk of court makes sure the jury has lunch, make sure that the press has the credentials, or, there's so many people and downtown Walterboro didn't have places to eat. What about food trucks, which they ultimately brought in? She was sort of the principal of an elementary school is what it felt like a little bit. So it's surreal for Becky to be the center of so much scrutiny. But what that scrutiny is about is her relationships and potential talking out of school with members of the jury, many of whom she knew beforehand. And many of the jurors knew each other. It's a small town. I always, I'm from a relatively small town myself in the South. And, if you had 100 people in church the day before jury selection, 5 of them would have gotten a jury summons. So, people knew each other, and the jury wasn't sequestered. Everybody in town knew who they were. And Becky, knew a lot of them personally. And so the question was, did she talk to them out of school? And did she say things that would prejudice them against Alec, particularly when he took the stand?
And you had jurors come forward to say, yes, at least one of them said, she influenced my verdict.
And it is a small town. And we talked a little bit about the bootlegging case involving Old Buster. It's extraordinary, but Becky's grandmother and grandfather and her uncle, who was a teenager, were federally charged with felonies in that bootlegging ring. They were on Buster's payroll.
Boy. And everything is connected.
Everything's connected there. But to your question, Megan, I think that we did have a first answer. There was a hearing back in January where the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Jean Toll, was asked by her former colleagues on the Supreme Court to take a listen to this request for a new trial. She denied it, but the defense is appealing it back to the Supreme Court. They've agreed to hear it, even though it seems unlikely they will overturn their own the person that they trusted with this decision. And then also they're very close allies with Judge Newman, who presided over the initial proceeding. He's very tight with the Chief Justice, Don Beatty. So I spoke with Dick. I saw him recently in Columbia, Dick Harpootlian, and they see their best chance at a new trial at the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, just a little bit further removed from South Carolina, which is such a small state, and getting fresh ears at this idea of not just did Becky Hill say things to the jurors that were prejudicial, but also did the state apply the wrong standard? And it was it's a measure of degrees. Like, yes, we acknowledge that she talked with the jury, but did it move the needle? And so what they hope is that the federal court will apply a different standard.
Yeah, that they're going to argue they were held to too high a burden of proof to prove jury tampering, and that a lower standard should have been applied, which would have allowed them to prove jury tampering, which would allow him to get a new trial. The Justice Toll was great when she came in and held that hearing over Becky Hill. The allegations against Becky Hill just got weirder.
Justice Toll, weirder. I will say, she's just such an extraordinary figure in South Carolina history. I used to cover South Carolina politics when I was a reporter at the state newspaper in Columbia, and she was the Chief Justice at the time, former Speaker of the House. She's been in public life there for 60 years and was a young lawyer. And this is so extraordinary to me, was a young lawyer in a time when women weren't even allowed to serve on a jury until 1968. Wow. And so she was talking to all male juries.
When she was up there, I say this lovingly, she seemed like a tough old broad in the best sense, like she wasn't going to tolerate any nonsense.
She would love to hear you say that. And she knew the Murdaughs. She knew the Murdaughs, and she had actually, both in the legislature, I talked with her about this, both in the legislature and on the bench, had pushed for laws that would kind of claw back some of the power that they were using, inappropriately, in her view. So she knew the Murdaughs quite well over the course of decades.
She made the comment about Becky Hill that would become very well known. Here it is, SOT 52.
I find that the clerk of court is not completely credible as a witness. Ms. Hill was attracted by the siren call of celebrity. She wanted to write a book about the trial and expressed that as early as November 2022, long before the trial began.
And that led to bad behavior by Becky Hill, which got this whole thing, mucked up. But do you remember, it's been a while since we've covered this, but she also has a son who worked in the courthouse. And there was an allegation about him wiping his phone and wiping her phone on the day that they were supposed to turn them over for an internal ethics investigation. It smelled to high heaven.
It is, I think it's, if you're not from a small town in the rural South, maybe it boggles the mind, but her son was the information technology director for the county. And that was, she's an elected official. She is, She is, but she's also, politically powerful, and some of those jobs are patronage jobs, and he was in that role, and is, accused of tapping the phone of an county administrator that was communicating with the state ethics board to try to find out what was going on in the investigation with his mother. There were all sorts of wiping the phone, which, the lawyers will tell you is a fairly standard move in some defense cases, but it looked highly irregular to a layperson. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's such a big case. It captivated so much attention that the center ring of the circus is really Alex Murdaugh in the trial, but there's so many outer rings. With the Mallory Beach case, for example, there's another case that's ongoing about whether the convenience store where Paul bought beer, whether the owner of that convenience store has been trying to harass the Beach family over the years. That's been going on for several years. Becky is facing an investigation into her behavior, and that's been going on. So we're in multiple layers of drama with this story, and it's just incredible. Like the layers, I remember sitting in court and watching Alec during a break. He was, 6 feet away from me. And he's the center of this, he's the eye of this hurricane, and there's so much swirling around him that one person could stir up so much chaos is really amazing.
So now here we are where he's appealing. He's going to argue Becky Hill mucked up the trial to the point where he gets another trial. We don't love the chances, but one never knows. And in the meantime, the wrongful death lawsuit that Mallory Beach's family brought against Alec, is that totally resolved?
That was the remnants of that were resolved this week with a $500,000 payment from Alex's insurer that had been tied up, and that was paid to the lawyers the paper was filed this past Monday. So that case is pretty well wrapped up.
Did the family get a payment too?
The family did. Not this past summer, but summer of 23, they received a payment largely from Parker's convenience store, this convenience store where Paul bought beer, on the order of $14 million. So it was a significant civil judgment that, and I learned a lot about personal injury law in the course of reporting this book. But, personal injury, this was considered, what was Mallory's life worth? It is blood money. And so it's a difficult fact of personal injury law that the more money that you get paid is a reflection of what, a jury might think your loved one's life is worth.
I'm sure it's a special form of sentencing for you, because every time you get into the car that money bought or the bed that money paid for, it's got to make you feel awful.
And they will tell you, Mrs. Pamela Pinckney, Hakeem Pinckney's mother. Hakeem was the paraplegic teenager who died in a nursing home and was robbed by Alex Murdaugh twice. She would tell you she would give back all of it for time with her son. It's the proxy we have in our judicial system to make a family as whole as possible, knowing that nothing really ever will.
So what, if anything, is happening with the other piece of this story, which is the possible murder?
There's only one other piece.
By Buster, Paul's older brother, of a young gay classmate who was killed on the road, but there's just only speculation that it was Buster Murdaugh, not actual proof, and they were going to reopen that investigation in the wake of all of this. Where does that stand?
Well, you mentioned the missing money. There's also the question of the missing guns and the homicide. But the biggest unanswered question is what happened to Stephen Smith. He was a 19-year-old young man who was found in the middle of a road in the summer of 2015. In the course of the investigation, the Murdaugh name came up 40 different times. People would say one of the boys or another was involved somehow. But I should be clear, there is no evidence that Buster or Paul, there's no proof that either one of them had anything to do with the death of this young man. Buster has gone so far to say, he had nothing to do with it. He wasn't close to it. He wasn't there that evening. And he's even sued some of the documentary filmmakers who he alleges have have said that he had a role in some way, shape, or form.
They certainly have laid those breadcrumbs.
But it is, yeah, you can go through it's 90 some pages of a police report where the name comes up over and over again in very strange ways. So there's always been a rumor that the Murdochs were involved somehow in his death or in making it impossible to find out who killed him. But I can tell you that the state grand jury has still been meeting over this case and is eager to figure it out. It is one that it still haunts Hampton County. So we may never know, but it won't be for lack of interviews and lack of trying, because they're actively working the case, from what I understand.
So in the time we have left, what's life like right now for Buster Murdaugh, the son whose entire family has been killed or is now in jail, and for Alex Murdaugh, who was living this life of excess and now is convicted of double homicide, not to mention all the fraud charges that were brought against him separately, which he was also found guilty on.
No, it's very poignant. I mentioned I was in Hampton last week and went by the cemetery, and I saw it took a while, but Maggie and Paul's gravestones have been put up, and people will leave flowers there. There's a ceramic dog that looks like Bubba, the yellow lab that belonged to the family, that's there. And most poignant of all, it's, on Maggie's headstone, it says, Margaret Branstetter Murdoch, mother. And on Paul's, it says Paul Terry Murdoch, son. And it's incredible that is how you be defined. But the person I was with said, what happens to Alec? Where is he in this picture? So will he be remembered as a father? Will he be remembered as the person that killed them? But he's in prison in the upstate. He has acclimated to prison life well, according to what I'm told. And by that, I mean, he has, Alex Murdaugh is the type of a person who works the system, and he has relationships. He's a disbarred lawyer, but he knows the law, and he helps other inmates with their questions. He's using his notoriety to his benefit. He was, accused the system of prisons found that he had been, essentially bribing other inmates to let him use their PIN number to make phone calls. He's figuring things out on the inside, but he will never, ever see the light of day, even if there's another trial on the homicide case. The state has effectively got an insurance policy. You remember back in November when he pled guilty to those dozens of financial crimes, and they got a sentence that will keep him in prison until he's roughly 80 years old. So regardless of whether the homicide is overturned. Mm-hmm. As for Buster, my understanding is, he's living in Bluffton, a community just adjacent to Beaufort, with his fiance is a woman who was in court with him every day, his girlfriend from law school, who is a lawyer. He got a substantial settlement from his mother's estate, roughly $500,000. There's a payment, I document in the book, where he participated in a documentary and got several $100,000 from that. So he has a small amount, not a small, but a significant amount of money to start a life, although it is difficult to see how he does so separate from his family, because his last name's Murdoch, and he's got that red hair. He's so it would be hard with that name and that hair to make a new life.
Mm-hmm. You'd have to go someplace else. I mean, there's a brother, yeah. Alex's brother seemed non-sociopathic. Perhaps there's some hope there. I don't know. Raised by that man with that family lineage. That's
well, and you're right about his brothers. His older brother Randy and his younger brother John Marvin are still in the community as well. I went by the law firm the other day, and his older brother Randy is a partner there and is actively working cases. His younger brother John Marvin runs a heavy equipment business, and as you go down the main drag from linking Hampton and Varnville, you see Murdoch Rentals right there. So they're still in the community and well regarded to a degree. But I think that everything's changed with the downfall.
Is anyone living at the estate where it happened?
So Moselle is the estate where it happened. It actually has been sold, and it's been sold in two pieces. The house itself was sold along with roughly 20 acres to an out-of-state buyer whose name was not revealed, and the Delta, the other acreage, was sold to a neighboring landowner who wanted the land. It is. I went by there the other day too, just to take a look. I had been onto the property during the trial. I had accompanied the jury on their visit to see the place. It still feels, it still seems like there's a heaviness in the air out there. It is still a haunted place, really. Dick Harpootlian said so, and I felt it as well.
Always will be. Wow, great reporting, Valerie. Thank you. Her name is Valerie Bauerlein, and the book again is "The Devil at His Elbow: Alex Murdaugh and the Fall of a Southern Dynasty." Google it, check it out. "Devil at His Elbow." Thank you so much for coming on and telling us the story and the updates.
Thank you so much for having me.
All the best. You know how much my family and I love our dogs, right? Yes, even my Strudwick, who once again got into Yardley's backpack this morning. Can't even imagine life without them, without the good version of them. They have a great life, but some dogs are not so lucky. And this is why I'm so glad to tell you about Delta Rescue, the largest no-kill, care-for-life animal sanctuary in the world. They have rescued thousands of dogs, plus cats and horses too. They provide all their animals with shelter, safety, and most of all, love. And they've been doing it for more than 45 years now. Delta Rescue relies solely on contributions to stay open, and giving can bring tax benefits too. Speak with your estate planner about how you can grow your estate while helping animals in need. And check out the estate planning tab on their website to learn more. We love our Thunder and Strudwick, but would like for other dogs who need love to find it too. Visit deltarescue.org today to learn more. That's deltarescue.org.